to Rising Up for Justice, a special weekly series presented by Rising Up with Sonali, an independently produced subscriber-supported program syndicated to radio stations, free speech TV, and podcast platforms. I'm Sonali Kolhatkar, host and executive producer. Our nation and our world is overrun by billionaires and bigots, but they are few and we are many. On this new series, exclusive to subscribers of Rising Up with Sonali and viewers of Free Speech TV, we'll hear from organizers in the movements for social justice and dig into the nuts and bolts of values, strategies, tactics, narratives, and how to build power. This week, Liv Kunin Berkowitz is my guest. They are senior media coordinator for Jewish Voice for Peace. Welcome to the program, Liv.
Thanks so much for having me. Really grateful to be here.
So first, let's begin by looking at the work of the organization. I'm sure anybody who's been interested in justice for Palestine over the past couple of years has likely heard of Jewish Voice for Peace. But for those who haven't, particularly for those who only get this view from our mainstream media that all Jewish people in the U.S. blindly support the state of Israel, how do you explain the work that your organization does and what your goals are for Jewish Voice for Peace?
Yeah, so JVP, Jewish Voice for Peace, is the largest anti-Zionist Jewish organization in the world. And our work is first and foremost about moving U.S. Jews into solidarity with Palestinians to join the Palestinian freedom struggle. And our goal is to break the U.S.-Israel alliance because we know that the occupation, apartheid, and now genocide is made possible by U.S. political support, military support, and funding. And another essential part of our work is forging the Judaism beyond Zionism alongside many other Jewish organizations and cultural workers to put forth and practice and create communities where we can practice Judaism in alignment with our political values, our cultural values, and spiritual values.
So it's not just about Palestinian solidarity. It's specifically looking at how the U.S. state props up the state of Israel, because, of course, that's wrapped up in the future of Palestinians.
Exactly. I mean, we know that the U.S. gives at minimum $3.8 billion to the Israeli military every single year. And that's been much higher in the last 2 years. Both the Biden administration and Trump administration have sent tons of money and also weapons transfers to support the genocide, have, blocked ceasefire resolutions in the UN, and continually provide this political support to make the genocide happen and the occupation continue. And so it's our job, not only as Jews, but as American citizens, to face our complicity here and do all that we can to end U.S. support, because that's the greatest level that we can pull as American citizens to stop the genocide.
Okay, so this is a pretty big goal, especially considering how much the U.S. seems so invested in ensuring that the state of Israel always has access to weapons. There is no red line Israel seems to be able to cross. How do you achieve your goals? What is the strategy that Jewish Voice for Peace has, both in the short term and the long term, for achieving justice for Palestinians, for breaking that U.S.-Israel alliance?
Yeah, I mean, I think we are operating with multiple strategies right now. We can't be in this moment without acknowledging the level of despair. Over the last 2 years, we've both seen an uprising of epic proportions across the United States and the world. We've seen, people in small cities and big towns across America, or I flipped that, big cities, small towns, everywhere. People have been rising up in solidarity with Palestine. And it's been so moving to see people bringing this conversation of Palestinian freedom and dignity just about in every single place that you can have this conversation. And we've seen, ceasefire resolutions pass across the country, movements towards divestment, and yet the genocide goes on. And so, with articulating our strategy and the ways we're keeping to move, we also have to acknowledge that this moment is one of tremendous despair, that the movement has not yet stop the genocide, and that, every single day is urgent when it comes to the life of the people living in Gaza right now.
How much of the strategy involves just resistance, right? We saw the student encampments in the early part of 2024, really the first half of 2024. I understand a lot of young folks who were involved in JVP were involved in those encampments. Is street action, actual sort of physical, putting bodies on the line, a central core strategy?
So one thing that JVP is particularly known for is our really large protests, that have happened in New York City and the Bay Area and Chicago, protests in major buildings and landmarks. And part of that work is changing the narrative. There's this overwhelming myth that American Jews support this genocide, and it's part of our responsibility to make this clear that there is a large swath of American Jews that vehemently oppose what's going on. And so through major actions, our goal is to transform this narrative. And I think we've seen in many ways success. The people, Democrats overwhelmingly support stopping to arm the Israeli government. And likewise, polls from last spring suggested that American Jews also support withholding weapons from Israel. And so we do have these major protests, and the encampments were such a great example. And tons of JVP students participated in the protests and in the encampments. But in addition to these major protests that are meant to get attention, to shift the narrative, and to undermine these prevailing narratives put forth by politicians and the mainstream media, part of our work is also that is divestment, and that comes from following the lead of the BDS movement, the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement that has put forth a vision for ending occupation and apartheid. And so also looking about how we can divest our institutions from the Israeli military, and from other institutions that support the Israeli military. And so that's looked like smaller campaigns that maybe aren't as, flashy as taking over Grand Central Station, but are also part of the day-to-day work. And I'm thinking right now specifically about a campaign in Ohio where the Cuyahoga County, which is a county in Ohio, has investments in Israel bonds. And that's money that goes directly to the Israeli military. And many cities and towns actually have Israel bonds, which is wild to be invested in a foreign government that's committing war crimes. And members of JVP, alongside the amazing Palestine Coalition in that county, testified at city council meeting after meeting, calling for divestment. And the county ultimately has chosen to divest some of its money from Israel bonds.
So local activism, because of course JVP has many local chapters around the country, is I imagine quite important.
Yeah, I think it's about pushing in every way, in every place we can, and that there's no place that's too small. So if it's your union, if it's your workplace, if it's your city, your town, all of those places, there's opportunities to push for divestment, to push, at minimum for the conversation to be had, but at maximum for divestment. I think another big win that we just saw was the National Education Association this week decided to cut ties with the Anti-Defamation League, which masquerades as a civil rights organization, but actually is an anti-Palestinian lobbying group. And so the fact that the National Education Association is cutting ties, saying that their curriculum does not serve our students, was just another big victory. And this was one of the movement, not of JVP, but I think we're seeing this needle being pushed just about in every terrain that it can be.
What about even lobbying members of Congress? There are very well-funded organizations out there that have a lot of money to invest in lobbyists whose entire job it is to basically hound or bribe members of Congress, for lack of a better term, members of Congress to continue this blind and unrelenting support of Israel, even in the face of a genocide. Does JVP put an effort into lobbying members of Congress, or does that feel like a lost cause?
It's a great question. I think, for so many of us, there's just a devastation to see the politicians continue to support arming Israel when the overwhelming amount of people, and specifically progressives in this country, are calling for an end to arming Israel. And JVP has a sister organization, JVP Action, and that organization focuses on our congressional work and yeah, we cannot cede the terrain. We can't cede any terrains. That's just the reality. And so we do lobby Congress. And, it's been a place where we've seen tremendous losses, but also some victories. In a congresswoman from the Chicago area, Congresswoman Delia Ramirez, just I believe a month ago, introduced legislation in Congress called Block the Bombs. And the goal of this legislation is to block the shipment of the largest weapons that the US sends to the Israeli military, these 2,000-pound bombs that have been responsible for destroying whole apartment buildings and whole communities. And to be clear, this legislation is not enough. We need to fully stop arming Israel, period. And this legislation is an essential first step. And we saw Congress people who, haven't yet spoken out in support of arms embargo support and sign on to this legislation. So we are seeing movement there. And, it's always a mix of lobbying, having those conversations. Jewish Voice for Peace Action brought students and rabbis to the Hill to have those conversations with members of Congress, but also a reality that we can't give up on protest and direct action, especially when Congress members refuse to meet with us. And so just last week, there was a group of leaders of JVP Chicago, and they were on a hunger strike. They hunger struck for 18 days, calling for the end of the starvation of Gaza. And they were trying to get a meeting with Senator Tammy Duckworth, the Illinois senator. And as she refused, they ultimately sat in on her office, and two hunger strikers on the 18th day of their hunger strike were arrested in her office. And so, I think the point is we do have to lobby, have those conversations, and see what doors might open so that we can impact policy. And, when we're met with refusals, we can't let that stop us from continuing to call for stopping to arm Israel.
And how do you explain what your biggest challenges are? I'm thinking in particular, whenever we see coverage of what Palestinians are going through, or how people are being active and resisting Israeli genocide, we see anti-Zionism being conflated with anti-Semitism. It's almost a knee-jerk reaction. It used to be that if you were Jewish, you could at least avoid being accused of anti-Semitism. But it seems as though these days in this reality, even Jewish people can be accused of being anti-Semites simply for supporting Palestinians. I remember that the terrible term that Noam Chomsky used to face for being called a quote-unquote self-hating Jew for speaking up for Palestine. Is that one of your biggest challenges?
Yeah, I mean, the challenges are numerous. We're up against the multi-billion-dollar weapons manufacture industry. There are people, including politicians in this country, that profit off of war. And so they have every incentive to continue on with war. But I'm going to focus on the narrative piece and what we're seeing in the corporate media, because that's what much of my work is involved with as our media coordinator. And yes, I think you're exactly right. I mean, the establishment, from pundits to politicians, are reliant on this narrative that it's anti-Semitic to criticize the Israeli government and military. And that's just what they do to shut down discourse. It is absolutely a form of repression, and it is completely pervasive, to the point, as you're saying, that, even Jewish people who speak out against the Israeli military and government are accused of being anti-Semitic. And we have to be absolutely clear. It is not anti-Semitic to criticize a government and military that's committing a genocide. And it's not anti-Semitic to be anti-Zionist, to oppose a Jewish supremacist state in historic Palestine. And those insults, are so often lobbed at our Palestinian and Arab and Muslim comrades who are organizing for freedom. And so I see this accusation as so often Islamophobic, hateful, and just an attempt to silence discourse. And it's failed, and it's succeeded. It's failed because the people are steadfast in speaking out against Palestine, including facing tremendous repression.
Now, this issue of narrative and storytelling is so central, but as you suggested in this particular issue, it seems to be really the biggest issue. And another big part of it, in addition to fighting back against the anti-Zionism is not the same as anti-Semitism, just seems to be centering the basic humanity of Palestinian people. It just, seems bizarre that in this day and age we would have trouble with acknowledging the most basic fact that Palestinians are human beings, right? And that is, of course, the first step in genocide is to dehumanize people. And so Palestinians being dehumanized has been central to the Israeli project of erasure. How does JVP work on this issue in terms of your narrative strategy just to center the humanity of Palestinians?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just to underscore what you said. There is no words for how shameful it is and how genocide is built on the dehumanization of people. And it's something that, we have seen many times over throughout the course of history, and to be witnessing it and bearing witness to this in the last 2 years, yeah, there's just kind of no words for it at all. And I think that, there are a range of things that we can do. First and foremost, it's uplifting Palestinian folks and especially folks in Gaza who are telling their own stories and bearing witness to their testimonies of their experience and what's happening. And we know that bearing witness in all its power is not stopping a genocide, and so holding that dual reality every day. But I think it's also about finding ways to intervene in the corporate media and put forth narratives of Palestinian humanity, of anti-Zionism, and in our work, particularly anti-Zionist Judaism. And it has been interesting to see shifts over the last 2 years. Newspapers that might have written us off in the past now do consult our perspective and voices. In some cases, some newspapers are moving further to the right. So we're seeing, shifts happening in both directions. But I think that the anti-Zionist movement in this country and the Palestinian freedom movement has been so loud and so persistent that it is to some extent impossible to ignore. And I think it has made cracks in the narrative. It's something we've seen really profoundly, to the point that, people are not considered as a monolith. It's not that all Jews support Israel, but actually understanding that there are many Jewish people with different perspectives on this issue. And then I think the other thing we're seeing is the proliferation of media outside corporate media, both on the left and the right, be it YouTube shows, cooperatively owned projects. And that, I have to say, has been really exciting because, the corporate media narrows the scope of stories. Sometimes I go to the New York Times expecting to read about what's happening in Gaza, and I have to go deep buried in the newspaper to find anything at all. And to me, that really amounts to genocide denial. We're seeing one of the biggest catastrophes I've witnessed in my lifetime, the destruction of schools and hospitals. Over 50,000 children in Gaza are injured or killed. And so when the New York Times buries this news deep in the newspaper, it's the utter abdication of journalistic responsibility. And so I think the opening of the media ecosystem to many platforms that are actually committed to truth-telling and sharing the stories of diverse groups of people has been something beautiful that we've seen happening over the last couple of years, and gives me a lot of hope for just the kind of truth-telling that's possible moving forward.
One of the other things that I'm wondering, Liv, if you can comment on, is that I've noticed more and more anti-Zionist Jewish voices make the assertion that to claim Judaism is supportive of genocide is the ultimate anti-Semitic trope. What do you say about that? And I'm wondering if that, is that a way to sort of flip the script on Jewish people being involved in Palestinian rights work?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I mean, how I think through this is that there is, of course, many Jewish people and institutions that are deeply invested in the 75 years occupation of Palestine that we've seen in the state of Israel. And I, in no ways want to minimize that responsibility of the Jewish community. And at the same time, the largest pro-Israel lobbying group in this country is Christians United for Israel. And that group has more members than all Jewish people in America total. And so we know that Christian Zionism is a driving ideology. And that is a deeply dangerous ideology that is about the end times coming and a cataclysmic war that will leave everyone to convert or die to Christianity. And it seems like a really extreme ideology, but this is a driving ideology in our government. Mike Huckabee, who's ambassador to Israel right now, is a ardent believer of this doctrine. And so, we know that what's driving the ongoing genocide is in large part Christian Zionism, the weapons manufacture industry, as I discussed earlier. And those people invoke Jewish safety to justify their own ideologies that have nothing to do with Jewish safety. And in fact, in the case of Christian Zionism, are deeply unsafe for Jewish people. And I think there's a profound anti-Semitism of them using and manipulating histories of Jewish trauma and persecution for their own political or religious ideologies. And, we're seeing this all over with politicians invoking anti-Semitism for their own pernicious goals. I mean, it's so evident with Donald Trump and his regime. They talk about anti-Semitism all the time as they're defunding universities, as they're detaining activists. And the Trump regime is just riddled with anti-Semitism. Obviously we saw Elon Musk's Nazi salutes. They've promoted neo-Nazis and Nazi sympathizers within their movement. And so to see them evoke anti-Semitism as a guise to do their authoritarian biddings, yeah, it's absolutely anti-Semitic. It's disgusting. And it's really unsettling because I think it confuses reality by misusing the term anti-Semitism. For every time someone expresses a support for Palestinian freedom, it loots that term of its meaning, and it makes it almost impossible to call out real anti-Semitism when it happens. And so I think it's a real crisis of this moment. And we have to be clear that what's driving anti-Semitism right now is the rise of the far right, is the authoritarian Trump regime. And they're trying to deflect and distract from their own supremacy by accusing the Palestinian freedom movement of anti-Semitism as a way to crush it.
Liv, how does Jewish Voice for Peace's work fit within the broader context of social justice work? Who do you see as your natural allies?
Yeah, I mean, I think core to our work is just the intertwinedness of all of our freedom and of all of our safety as human beings on this earth, and a core commitment to collective liberation for trans people, for working people, for people of color, for Palestinians, for Jewish people, and knowing that many people fall into multiple of those categories. And so, we see our work as one piece of a larger struggle for collective liberation and freedom. And we work closely, of course, with leaders in the Palestinian rights movement, including the BDS movement, including AROC out here. I live in the Bay Area, and they do incredible work organizing out here. And so we follow many leaders in the Palestinian rights movement, and then are also part of the broader Rising Majority Coalition, which is a coalition of progressive groups across the country fighting for dignity and freedom for all people.
And then how can people get in touch with Jewish Voice for Peace? How can they support your work? What does JVP need from progressives around the country?
Thanks for that question. There are so many ways to get involved. There are chapters and pods all over the country, so I think going to the website and finding your most local formation to support, be it by joining JVP or if you're organizing with another group, putting on events in coalition. We also have a power half hour, which has gone every single day, or most days since October 7th. We do it Monday through Thursday, and that can be found on our website as well.
What is that? What is power half hour?
Yeah, so it's a space where we take action together, and that ranges from writing letters to the editor, to major newspapers, calling members of Congress, taking virtual action, but also a space where rabbis will come in and offer prayers, activists will offer poetry and songs. So it's a place of collective gathering, grief, and also taking action, and knowing that those things always have to be entwined, that we have to stay sensitive and stay in our grief, and we also have to stay in movement and stay in action. And so that happens every day, Monday through Thursday, and is a space that people all over the world are welcome to join if there's not an active pod or chapter right in your area.
And give out that website for Jewish Voice for Peace.
That is jewishvoiceforpeace.org.
And we will post a link to that from our website. Anything coming up in the fall that people should be looking out for as they listen to this interview? Any big campaigns coming up?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're gonna stay. There's so much happening going on both in people's locals areas, ongoing work about divestment from Israel bonds, and then also drawing increasing attention to the work of weapons manufacturer companies who are an integral part of this genocide. And so often people are not drawing the connections to this industry that's propelling not only the genocide in Gaza, but violence and war and domination all over the world. And then also, continue collaborations with many of our partners. I want to specifically name Palestinian Youth Movement's Maersk campaign. Maersk is the largest shipping organization in the world. And PYM has been putting relentless pressure on Maersk for their role in the genocide. And Maersk folded in some ways to that pressure recently. They said they will no longer ship goods from the occupied settlements. But that being said, Maersk still ships the 2,000-pound weapons, these weapons that go from the United States to Israel. And so we'll be in collaboration on that campaign that's led by the Palestinian Youth Movement. And yeah, I mean, I think the goal is both to be real about this level of despair that's happening, the fact that this genocide is still ongoing. I believe we're over 640 days now, which is unimaginable. And also noticing that there's been just relentless pressure from in the educational sphere, in the political sphere, in the economic sphere, in the cultural sphere, and that the cracks are showing, and that we, alongside, leaders in the Palestinian movement, will be continuing to put pressure on those cracks.
I want to thank you so much, Liv, for joining us today. Good luck to you.
Thank you so much for your time. Really grateful for this program.
My guest has been Liv Kunin Berkowitz, Senior Media Coordinator for Jewish Voice for Peace. This is Rising Up for Justice, and I'm Sonali Kolhatkar, host and executive producer of this new weekly half-hour series, exclusive to viewers of Free Speech TV and subscribers of my long-standing program, Rising Up with Sonali. You can find out more at risingupwithsonali.com.